Imaginal acts become facts. In this video, what I've done is I've taken a handful of quotes from Neville Goddard, Napoleon Hill, and Abdullah. So Abdullah was the mentor, the one that introduced Neville to the law. When Neville met Abdullah, he taught him the ways of how to work with the imagination. Abdullah was also the mentor of Dr. Joseph Murphy, and or inspired Dr. Joseph Murphy, as well as some others who were notable figures in discussing working with the power of the imagination. Now, one of the things that we learn on this journey is that when you read something, when you study something, and you go and apply it, and then go back and read it again, you will start to uncover deeper meanings, deeper understandings. So what did Abdullah teach Neville? Well, what Abdullah taught Neville was the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is mystical interpretations of the Bible, and there's a lot more to Kabbalah. But one of the main principles he taught Neville was different meanings from the Bible that, when understood at a certain level, revealed deeper insights as to the nature of God. See, when we try to interpret reality, we have to remember that a lot of times we're interpreting it through the five senses. And these five senses are expressions and elements that were created by the sixth sense. Everything was created by the single source, the imagination. A lot of times they never used to teach the Kabbalah until you got to the age of 40. And one of the reasons why is because the mystical interpretations in the Kabbalah, the deep reflective ideas and stories that were revealed, shift perspective around and brings a person into a cause-based reality. They start to see reality as the cause. Most people wander around the world seeing themselves as the effect. At a certain point in your journey, you'll start to uncover that you are the cause, and by shifting perspective on the various circumstances, environments, and dealings that you have with people to the cause perspective, you start to see how it was within you that projected outwards to materialize and express that what you are experiencing. And we go through different stages in life of learning, growing, applying this information, and we start to experience more and more that we are the cause. And when someone gets to a certain level, they start to uncover certain mysteries of how this world works. Now, if you think about the five senses for a moment, we have to remember that we are really interpreting what is received by the five senses, data input through the five senses, internally. We're giving it meaning. The meaning is internal. We either get this meaning from past experiences, or we receive this meaning from our inner world, the sixth sense. And the sixth sense created everything. So the sixth sense is the one or the thing or whatever it is, because in the Kabbalah they say 99% of what exists is the sixth sense and only 1% is the five senses. What has created the five senses can also create many other things, many other experiences, many other manifestations that go beyond the comprehension of the five senses. Now, this kind of mystical way of thinking is only something that is experienced through being on this journey for an extended period of time. There are glimpses in our life in earlier stages where we start to experience this, synchronicities and certain ways of bringing forth results, creating that we want, that go beyond what we've ever learned, that seem to show up in coincidental ways that seem too meaningful to be coincidences, otherwise known as synchronicities. This is actually us working with, unknowingly, intuitively, a lot of times, with the sixth sense. So Abdullah taught this to Neville, and we're going to discuss this story of what Neville shares when he introduces the impact that Abdullah had on him. And we're going to break it down, and then we're going to look at some quotes from Neville and Napoleon Hill. Now, why am I including Napoleon Hill in this discussion? Napoleon Hill mentions in Think and Grow Rich that if you follow the principles contained within the book, the early principles, then you'll start to understand how to work with the sixth sense and infinite intelligence. A very far out and esoteric concept that he says cannot be understood unless somebody has experience with it. Trying to explain something to somebody who has not developed the faculties or the conditioning to understand something is trying to explain to him something that they will never understand because they just have not experienced it. They have no reference experiences. To imagine in your mind, to have a sequence of events that you run in your mind, have faith in it, and some way, somehow have it brought forth in your life, defies any kind of explanation, yet there are many countless examples of this being so. And I'll vouch for many examples. Now, I came across this journey of understanding this stuff through Think and Grow Rich, where all I did was, in 2004, I said, I want to get out of $50,000 debt. So I followed the principles in Think and Grow Rich, and within a few years, I noticed that reality started to change and a lot of things were happening, and I was attracting certain opportunities, and I was getting doors that were open for me that I never knew existed, never even believed were possible. And then some way, somehow, through the sequence of events, the chain of events, I was able to get out of $50,000 debt. And it was around that time when I started to understand a little deeper this concept of infinite intelligence and working with the sixth sense. Or you can call it the creative imagination. And through the repetition of following the process in the book, I started to develop a deeper relationship with the sixth sense. And as a result of it, I went more into a cause-based way of looking at reality. So the way I look at reality now is I look out and I see reality as a manifestation of what is in my imagination. If something is expressed in the external world, I can track back within and see where it was created. It was from either a past scenario that I've experienced that has gone and impressed itself in my subconscious mind and brought forth, or it is something that I had consciously thought of or subconsciously thought of. See, most of us go through life imagining things, and we fail to realize that the net result of that imaginary act, whether it's conscious or not, is the manifestation of it. So we have a choice. We can focus and have imaginary thoughts of that what we desire, or we could be stimulated by our five senses to have imaginary thoughts that we do not desire. Or we can be stimulated by the five senses to have imaginary thoughts that we do desire. But the bottom line is this, that the imagination projects itself outwards in some mystical way, which is the sixth sense, a lot of times. And sometimes it involves some logical processes, because there's a saying in the Bible, as you believe, so it shall be done unto you. Now, when we go deep into this saying, we'll start to realize that the as you believe part is not just conscious, it is subconscious. It is how you believe reality to work. If we have programming that's within our subconscious mind that denies it, it is going to be brought forth through those channels. So what do? We do the work on ourselves and cleanse those aspects that are within our subconscious that are elements that we've learned through our existence here on this planet, and learn to trust the sixth sense more. So to emphasize this, let's go through the discussion that Neville had in one of his lectures about Abdullah. He said, I said to Abdullah, in the month of October, late October, you know I've been gone from Barbados for almost 12 years. I came here in 22, and it's almost 12 years, and I've never had the desire to go back. But now I have a hungry desire, a haunting desire, to go to Barbados. Not a thing stops me but lack of money. I have no money. He said to me, you are in Barbados. I said, I'm in Barbados? He said, yes, you are in Barbados. And so you see Barbados. And you see America from Barbados. And you can smell the tropical land of Barbados. See only the little homes of Barbados. And that's all you do. You just simply sleep this night in Barbados. Those were the instructions that Abdullah gave to Neville. Now, when we first think about this, if we haven't been exposed to this, and this is new to us, this may sound very ludicrous, as it did for Neville. And he said, well, I thought him insane, really. I mean, at this moment, it seems so stupid because 72nd Street, we still had 50 and 60-story buildings, and little Barbados, with a little 3-story house or little 3-story building, almost the tallest that you'd find, and narrow little streets and no sidewalks. And I'm walking on a sidewalk that is wider than the widest street in Barbados on the 72nd Street. So what he's saying is that the fact is I am in New York. That's the fact. That's what he was thinking at that moment. Now remember that. He got a specific instruction from Abdullah that said, today you are in Barbados. You will go to sleep tonight in Barbados. What he was really seeing is that to disregard what is being experienced via the 5 senses and focus on the imagination, augment reality to experience that you are in Barbados right now, which sounds like a very far out concept if you don't understand how the 6th sense work. Now, when you go back to the early point of this discussion, I mentioned that the 6th sense created the 5 sense. The 6th sense is the 99%. 1 sense of all that exists, 1% of what all exists is the 5 senses. Now, if you don't understand how this works, this makes no sense at all, because all you know is that what you can interpret via the 1% of the 5 senses, and you see it as the 100%. So this very act that Abdullah said to him sounds crazy. And even Neville felt that. He said, well, nevertheless, that night I slept in Barbados. But remember, he is still, in parts of his mind, not believing he is in Barbados, because his senses deny it. He says, I assume that I'm in Barbados, in my mother's home, and I saw America relative to Barbados, and it wasn't under me that night. It was north of me, about 2,000 miles. Well, the next day, I didn't tell him anything. About a week later, when nothing happened, I thought I would approach him. This time, we moved into November. I said, you know, Ab, not a thing has happened. He wouldn't discuss it with me. He turned his back on me and went into his little library and slammed the door. Now, this was a very important lesson. Abdullah was a very wise man. Even if Neville was trying to convince him that, wait a second, I am not in Barbados right now. Look, I'm in New York. I'm talking to you. Abdullah denied it, did not want to hear it, because if he gave any thought to that, then they would not be working with the 6th sense anymore. They would not be working with the imagination. And Neville is not following the instructions. And he says, about 3 times I tried to open up the discussion with my friend Ab between the moment when I first talked to him and the end. He would never discuss it on the basis. How could he discuss with me? How am I going to Barbados when I'm already in Barbados? That's stupid to discuss how I'm going to go when I'm in Barbados. And if I'm faithful to my assumption, I can't discuss the how. I'm already there. Now, when you reflect upon this, again, from 5 sensory-based meaning, it doesn't make any sense. But from 6th sense, working with this over and over again through repetition, it makes sense. That an imaginary act, that assumption has to be held true despite what is being brought to your awareness from the 5 senses, because that's past projection of what's within the subconscious. And as a result of honoring that what is in the imagination, things begin to change. He says, well, this went on. On the morning of the 4th day of December, there's no job, no place to go, and the last boat will get me there by Christmas is going to sail on the 6th. Under my door is a little letter from my brother Victor, and he writes, so at Christmas we never got together as a family. In this letter he explained why he asked me to come. I know you have no job. There's no excuse for not coming, so I had a check for $50. Maybe you need a shirt, a pair of shoes, socks, etc. I've informed the Furnace Witty line that you will pass your ticket. Well, I was excited, so I ran to the furnace line and gave them my letter. They said, "We have a message from your family here in Barbados. We give you a ticket, but we no longer have first class tickets. You can book the third class and use the facilities of the first class, but you must sleep in third grade until you reach the island of St. Thomas. When you arrive to St. Thomas, someone leaves the ship and you can take the first class." I said, "I'll take it." I rushed straight to Abdullah and said, "Ab, I got my ticket to Barbados, but I have to go on third grade. I'm excited and happy about it." He said, "Who told you to go to Barbados, and who told you that you are going to Barbados third class? You're in Barbados and in first grade." He said nothing more. He was not even happy that I'm going to Barbados now. So again, what is he teaching Neville? He's teaching Neville to hold true to the imaginal act, to believe 100% that it is to be exactly how you want it to be, and it will be so. And although Neville is creating that, what he desires, which is the trip to Barbados, he's teaching something even more profound, because Neville went on to share this information with us, that you can have exactly what you want by working with the powers of the imagination, by assuming it fully in the imagination, and rejecting that what is being received by the five senses as the denial of that what is in the imagination. So he says, "On the morning of the 6th day of December, I went down to my ticket for the third grade. I went to the counter when the passengers checked in. I presented my ticket and they said, 'I have good news for you, Mr. Goddard. Someone has canceled. You go to the first class.' I travel first class to Barbados, 10 days back, with 3 heavenly months in Barbados in between." So this was the story that Neville shared about Abdullah to teach him a very important lesson, which contains within it the essence of just about every single presentation, every single conversation, every single lecture there is on working with the imagination. And that is this: absolute faith and belief in the imagination. So Neville says, in this world, you and I create states, but the spiritual states are eternal. So he's referring to, again, what Abdullah taught him through the mystical interpretations of the Bible. He says that the characters in the Bible are states, and those are spiritual states, and we travel through spiritual states, and we can create our own states here. So that state that he created was the state of being in Barbados and traveling first class. To the degree that he is self-persuaded of that state, and he might even have within him different programming that's in his subconscious mind that denies it, but to release that programming and hold true to that imagination, it will be so. As you believe, so it shall be done unto you. He says, we create a state here, and it's not eternal. We create a state to deliver individuals forevermore. I create a state. If somebody asks me, and they say, will you hear that I am, and they name what they would like to be, all right, so that I must create the state, knowing that he is now in a state that he dislikes. I must distinguish between the being in the state that he is in. Here's an example. So I see him unemployed, and all right, he wants to be gainfully employed. There's nothing wrong with that. So I represent himself to myself as one who is gainfully employed, who has more than he's ever had before, to the degree that I'm self-persuaded that he is what I have now imagined him to be. To that degree, he will actually become it. I move him out of one state into another. So what we're talking about here in this existence is that we live in different states. We move in different states. And what is these states? Well, Napoleon Hill calls them vibrations, or you could call them states. And what is contained within the states are the people, environment, and circumstance of the states. Now, can there be same states existing simultaneously? Yes, that is so. That is reality. We're individuals and we are experiencing different states. Someone is in an unemployed state and they come to you and see me as gainfully employed. you have a choice to react to their state or to bring them into the state of being employed to the degree that you are self-persuaded. And as Earl Nightingale said in Stranger's Secret, only then you must truly wish upon a thing and not at the same time wish upon 100 other incompatible things just as strongly. Because as you believe, so shall be done unto you. Now, this is the exercise of life, is to say, okay, here we have a state that is a desired state, and we want to be in this state and live in this state. And if the senses deny the state, we must release that what denies the state and still live in the state until it eventually materializes as the reflection of the state. That is working with the sixth sense. If you're working with the five senses, and you could use some of the five senses as a support to it, you'll do things or whatever, but to the degree that you work with this and you continue to work with it, you'll be able to evolve into working predominantly with the sixth sense. That's when you experience a radical shift where you see yourself as the cause of reality. And you work with the imagination and you hold with faith and confidence that image that you want to create. And some way, somehow, it becomes so, because what happens in the external world is it is reflected from the state within. Now, if any moment the external world denies the state from within, we still hold true through the faith of the state, by living in the state, speaking of the state, being in the state, assuming the state, until that programming gets erased and replaced with proof, synchronicities, experiences in the external world that reflect the materialization of that state, step by step. So he says, so I represent him to myself as one who is gainfully employed, who has more than he has ever had before, to the degree that I'm self-persuaded that he is. So he's saying to the degree that I am self-persuaded that he is. He's not telling him to be self-persuaded. He is choosing to be self-persuaded. And to the degree that he is self-persuaded, when he experiences that person, he will be in that state. He will actually become it. I will move him out of one state into another state. In the presence of him, if he stays there, he will move into that state. He will go into the state. Now, think about this in your own personal experiences. There's a concept that we talk about a lot in personal development. It's called state transference. What you feel, they feel. If you feel a certain state, observe the people around you also feeling that state. Who caused the state? Was it you or them? Or was it all one in imagination, bringing it forth as a collective? See, the five senses will tell you some story. If you don't see it from an empowering perspective, it'll be this or that. But the truth is this: it was created within, and it was brought forth from within. It was maybe past programming and past imaginal acts that went in and brought it forth, but you brought it forth. So we take responsibility. And by taking responsibility, we say, well, we are going to hold the state. We're going to keep the state, and the external world will reflect the state. So if the person comes up to you and says, put me in the state, and they choose to be in the state, then have faith and confidence by assuming and being self-persuaded of the state that they will arrive in the state. You will notice this. In the presence in front of you, they will have the ideas, the hunches, the inspirations, the actions, the behaviors. Things will start to change, and they will do the thing because you hold them in your mind in that state, and they become so. But that state which he fell remains for anyone to fall into, and all can fall into the same time for that matter. He's not the only occupant of the state of being unemployed. There could be millions being unemployed, and there could be millions who desire to be out of it. Many who are unemployed have no desire to be out of it. They prefer to be on welfare. That's their desire, perfectly all right. But if someone desires to be gainfully employed and to leave the state of being unemployed, you and I can create that state. Now, creating the state is one thing. Maintaining the faith and belief in the state is another thing. And this is where the exercise comes in. Holding the state. So he says, how do I create the state? By using my imagination. imagination is not a state. It's the human existence himself, and God is actually within you as your own wonderful human imagination. Within you, the sixth sense is our imagination. We all have the ability to imagine. Imagination programs and impresses the subconscious mind. The conscious mind, the subconscious mind exists here in this earth-based existence. The superconscious mind, or infinite intelligence, exists beyond. And working with the imagination is a conversation with the superconscious mind, or infinite intelligence, how you want to look at this, which impresses the subconscious mind to bring it forth in the external world, which is interpreted via the five senses through the subconscious mind. If you don't work with the imagination constructively like that, then we allow the five senses to program the imagination. Whatever information you take in is programming the five senses to imagine automatically, as we said earlier, that we can work with our imagination constructively, or we can allow information to come in via our five senses and automatically create imaginal acts. I did that conversation, one of Neville's videos, I recommend you watch it, on mental conversations. And he said, speech is the image of mind. What you say when you talk to yourself, what you say when you talk to others, is revealing to you that what is being impressed on your subconscious mind, which is occurrences of your imagination. If he said speech is the image of mind, then that speech derives from the imagination. And that speech, even if you speak about another, it is done unto yourself. And that's why we follow the golden rule. Do unto others as you wish they do unto you. Because no matter what goes in the imagination and is impressed upon the subconscious mind will be brought forth. And so we say, the state that we choose is X, and this is what we have in our imagination. And that is working with the sixth sense. And from there, we allow the subconscious mind to do its thing to bring forth the results. See, because the subconscious mind projects outwards and creates reality. If it's an action you have to take, your subconscious mind will get you to take the action. If it's a person you want to attract, the subconscious mind will attract that person. See, all subconscious minds are connected via the subconscious through the superconscious. We're actually individual expressions of one mind. We are both individual expressions and connected as a universal mind by the superconscious. And the five senses, if it's fear, doubt, and indecision based, we talked about this on my previous videos, will deny that that connection exists, because that part of fear gets us to overly identify with the individual aspect of ourselves, which does exist. The individual aspect exists, and so does the universal mind. We're individual expressions of the universal mind, and all is actually one mind. And working with the imagination impresses your subconscious mind and all to bring it forth in the spirit of harmony. So Napoleon Hill adds to this in Think and Grow Rich by talking about imagination from a certain perspective. I want to discuss this because I believe it'll be really helpful to understand the depths and power of our imagination, working with it, especially seeing that it's one of the primary lessons that was taught to Neville Goddard by Abdullah. He says, the imagination is literally the workshop wherein are fashioned the plans created by man. The impulse, the desire, is given shape, form, and action through the aid of the imaginative faculty of the mind. Man's only limitation within reason lies in his development and use of his imagination. He has not yet reached the apex of development in the use of his imaginative faculty. He has merely discovered that he has an imagination, and he has commenced to use it in a very elementary way. Now, the beautiful thing is this. If you look around, you'll start to see more and more awareness has been put on the past lectures. Many years ago, these lectures were created on Neville Goddard as a result of consciousness rising. And as consciousness rises, we begin to work more with the imagination. We no longer use what Neville Goddard referred to in that discussion that we did on power, the world of Caesar, which is control, four space elements via the five senses. We work from a place of real power, which was discussed in the book, lectures, and videos we did on David Hawkins' work, Power versus Force and Letting Go. Higher states of consciousness abundance mentality, unconditional love, working with the imagination. And even Napoleon Hill said this in Think and Grow Rich. He said that the sixth sense, which, by the way, is going back to the start of this discussion, is understood through working with the principles. I vouch personally that I came to this journey of Neville Goddard and working to this principle through the philosophies of Think and Grow Rich, but many have arrived through many different modalities or many different channels. But we all arrive to this point right now where we understand that the power is in our imagination. And he said in there that the sixth sense will not function in a mind that was riddled with fears. And we also discussed this on the last few videos, and I'll mention this again. Doubt and indecision are the seedlings of fear. Doubt and indecision are the seedlings of fear. We have the ability to, at this level of consciousness, observe when we are getting to a place of fear by being present and aware when we are experiencing doubt and indecision. And if you haven't watched my last video that I did talking about working on that concept, I recommend you do that. We'll get into working with doubt and indecision in there and how it crystallizes into fear, or how it brings forth fear, which then expresses itself outwards and materializes into form, because all is an impression and expression of the subconscious as far as the five senses go. The key to this is to remember that if you want to work with the higher faculties of imagination, as Abdullah said it, you cannot have doubt and indecision. Is that not what Abdullah said to him? Without saying a word. So Napoleon Hill says two forms of imagination. Now I'm going to segment this and bring this into a nice closure. We're talking about five senses and sixth sense. He says, synthetic imagination. Through this faculty, one may arrange old concepts, ideas, or plans into new combinations. This faculty creates nothing. It merely works with the material of experience, education, and observation with which it is fed. It is the faculty used by most by the inventor, with the exception of those who draw upon the creative imagination when he cannot solve the problem through synthetic imagination. So synthetic imagination is working with the net result of other people's thinking. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what Neville is talking about is working with the creative imagination, which created all the information, infinite intelligence. You can take what you learn in books and whatever, and it will do you really well. What we're saying, and what he was said in Think and Grow Rich, is that after doing that, specialized knowledge, all those kinds of things, you will start to tap more into the sixth sense. And that's when you work with the creative imagination. What's the creative imagination? Through the faculty of creative imagination, the finite man, or the finite mind of man, has direct communication with infinite intelligence. In other words, become one with the Creator, what Neville was talking about. It is the faculty through which hunches and inspirations are received. It is by this faculty that all basic or new ideas are handed over to man. So when a person starts to work with their imagination and is able to bring forth with their imagination in ways that they have never discovered before, or in synchronistic ways that defy logic and understanding, they are working with the creative imagination. Now, if you look at big breakthroughs or experiences in your life, study successful people, study the experiences in your life, study those that were able to create the results, whatever. Many were able to, or will report to you, that what they created, they had no idea how it was going to be created. They just knew it was going to be created. That's the key distinction. They knew, they had faith, they believed. And if you dig a little deeper, you'll see that they had once imagined to be able to create. Now, some way, somehow, it is brought forth. So we have a choice then. We could say we can work with a synthetic imagination, which is limited, because you're just working with what is already there, which is already created. Or we could choose to work with the creative imagination. So how do we work with the creative imagination? Well, we remember the lesson that Abdullah taught Neville Goddard. Is that, what is it that you desire? Imagine it. Hold true to it and be as it is so right now. Imagine it, and even if your senses deny it, be okay with the denial, as in don't accept the denial, but release the denial and assume that imagining augment the reality to be so. And through the extent that you are self-persuaded that it is so, it will become so. Now, I'll speak from experience as I talk about this. There's many things in my life that, as a result of working with what I had learned from Think and Grow Rich, that was brought forth, including at a certain point in my life being attracted to the information of Neville Goddard. And it wasn't until I got to a certain level of working with my mind when I really started to trust myself that I got exposure to this information. If you go back to my channel, you'll see I did a discussion on how to be your own best friend. It was during that time in my life where I had reflected upon how I was dependent on the external world for happiness. And I said, everyone I know that lives a happy life, I mean a truly happy life, feels complete within. So I have to go in and figure out how to complete myself within. So I attracted this book. I made a decision that I was going to do this, and I attracted this book, and I did a whole discussion on it. I'll put a link in the description. And I actually put it to use, and I said, I'm going to be my own best friend. I'm going to find all the completion within. It was around that time where I discovered the Autobiography of the Yogi, which spoke about self-realization. And Yogananda speaks the same things, but different ways, about the very philosophy that Abdullah taught Neville, that Neville teaches us, that Napoleon Hill teaches us. That there is a link within us to the divine. It is one with us. We have the connection there with us. It is the sixth sense, and we can work with it, and we can create our reality from that perspective. Now, when you learn to trust yourself and become your own best friend, and to appreciate yourself, you start to listen to yourself, the voice within, and then your imagination starts to get more power. Then you start to attract more information, and after I got that book, Autobiography of the Yogi, and went through it and created the video on it, I then started to discover that I had this conversation within, this imagination within, that I was not using to the extent that I could use. And as a result of working with it, I started to create scenarios. I used to imagine myself. There was a time, I remember I said around that time, I wanted to travel. So very similar to Neville's example. I said, I wanted to have a speaking circuit. I wanted to travel for 1 month and live out of hotels and speak and do live events. And I imagined it. And then all of a sudden, I had a conversation with one of my business partners, Iris Reading, and we did a deal where I did 16 flights in 30 days and did all these workshops across Toronto and the US, and it became so. Then I used the very concepts to evolve my business. I said, what do I want to do next? Well, I saw myself mentoring and advising and coaching and consulting, and right then and there I started attracting coaching clients because I imagined it in my mind and believed it to be so. And then one of my coaching clients who I attracted talked about subconscious mind audios, and I said, I want to create a program that trains my mind and helps others train their mind, because I was dealing with coaching clients on cleansing their subconscious mind from disempowering programming, which is a net result of what I had learned in the journey. And I want to use this program to create my ideal relationship. And I used the program and used the imagination exercise to attract the exact relationship I had a checklist. I have 15, 20 items of what I was looking for. Exactly. And I remember at the time talking to people about it. They would be like, this and that, the statistics and the likelihood and all that stuff, I denied. And I attracted the person that met every last item on the checklist. And she is my girlfriend. And she's in front of me right now. And from there, I created the subconscious mind training program, and that ended up becoming a very big success. And I have countless stories after that by using this power. The exact philosophies that I'm sharing in this video and the last videos that I share that came as a net result of my earlier stages of uncovering this information through Think and Grow Rich, getting out of $50,000 debt. And I will assure you right now, at my latest iteration of understanding of how this stuff works, that I rely more on the sixth sense than I do on the five senses. The five senses to me are expressions of what shows up from within the sixth sense. So I imagine and I express words, actions, and so forth automatically to the five senses, using it as a reflection of what is within, which is a large part of what I talk about. The external world is a reflection from within. It is revealing to you what is within. And if I allow my imagination to program my subconscious mind, then it will express outwards and create into form. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you want a copy of the mind map, the link is in the description. I will talk to you soon. Take care.